Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for today's Steel Connect classroom webinar with Captain Unreliability. We are so excited to have you here this morning. Thanks for joining us. So, Captain, how do you feel about writing the column for plant services? That must be a huge honor.
Not really an honor. It's a necessity, given the fantastic advice that's given in the column. I think everyone needs to heed to the advice given within the column. So I have, no ands, ifs, or buts about it. It was definitely a must. So.
Okay, I'm sure they are very happy to have you, and we thank everybody for joining us today. Before we get started with your presentation, if you don't mind, sir, could I go over some housekeeping information for our attendees? So Steel Connect Classroom is a webinar series that brings you different reliability experts from around the industry to help you get an education and learn things about sealing as well as other reliability issues. If you are using social media, you can join the chat using hashtag SteelConnect. You can ask questions at any time during the presentation in the question section on the right-hand toolbar. And then the slides and the recording of the webinar will be emailed to you within 24 hours of our completing today. It is recorded, and you can you'll be able to watch it, share it with your friends, because I know this is going to be some really valuable information. So again, Captain, thanks for coming. We're happy to have you here, and I'm going to turn it over to you. And by the way, remember, ask us your questions. You're gonna want to get as much information as you can from Captain Unreliability. Take it away.
All right, awesome. To start, my name's Joe Anderson. I appreciate you guys attending today, but today we'll be presenting as Captain Unreliability. To give you a little bit of a background, Captain Unreliability came to be while we were, when I was working in a manufacturing facility, and in a way, we had to almost laugh at some of the things that were going on with that facility. I won't tell you where that is, but we got to thinking. It started with we were making jokes about acronyms and coming up with things like root canal analysis for RCA, because it's like pulling teeth to get people to actually do it, and that kind of spawned into what it is today. So I appreciate you being here. One of the questions that people were asking me is if I was going to go on camera. And the reason I'm not on camera is, one is, COVID has been tough on us all. And for me to fit in this outfit, it's been kind of a mess. If you can picture, if you took some pantyhose and filled it with cottage cheese, that would be about what it would look like for me to be in this costume right now. So that's the reason why I'm not on camera. Credentials of Captain Unreliability. He's got a bachelor's in synchronized swimming. He is a CMRP, but that's a certified maintenance and reliability perpetrator. He's not quite the guy that you want within your facility, as well as a certified reliability loser, a CRL. But we do have a column in plant services, and again, it's the greatest advice known to man. But again, it's satire. This is all a joke, just to make sure that that's out there. But let's go ahead and get started. So today what we're going to do is we're going to share some tips in each of these areas, leadership tips on how to be in each of these classes, how to be the best in class. And so we're going to cover engineering, we're going to cover maintenance, we're going to cover safety. But I had this idea for a webinar, and I'm just wondering if this idea would work. But I was thinking, I want to do a webinar called How to Avoid Frauds, and and charge like $100, and then make the fee non-refundable, and see how many people I can get to sign up. And then on the day of the webinar, I just cancel it. I just think that'd be a great idea. I don't know about you, but that's just a random thought. Well, let's go ahead and get into this. So when it comes to leadership within a facility, we know that there are certain traits and characteristics that you need in order to be a great leader. So these tips are going to be based on these characteristics. So here are 5 traits or characteristics that are needed to be best in class in engineering. 1 is you got to be an innovator. 2 is you got to be persistent. 3, you want to be the civil in civil engineering if you're a civil engineer. You want to strive for perfection to achieve excellence, and when possible, always build in redundancy. And so we'll go ahead and take a look at this. So example number 1, be an innovator. So as you can see by this picture, this is innovation to the nth degree. If you don't have a weed eater, you just convert your grinder. This is how to be an innovator, which is great. Innovation, it breeds ideas. And so when you're stuck in a pinch, create your weed eater. What this reminds me of is the way that we do engineering in our facilities. And so this is great. Whenever you have a problem to solve, you figure out, whatever shortcut you can take to make it happen and fix the problems. And so it's a great way to think through this. The next is, be persistent. And so here you can see the persistence and how it paid off. I think they finally found the spot that they needed this manhole to be, which is great. But you got to understand with engineers, to be the best, right? Engineers, there's basically 3 types of people. There's the types of people that see the glass half empty. There's the type of people that see the glass half full. And then there's engineers. And the engineers, they see the glass as that there's more room to fill. And so, being persistent is the key here. And that persistence leads to excellence, as you can see in this picture. The next is being the civil engineer. So as you can see from this picture, it's a perfect placement to have a lot of grass right in the middle of a parking lot. This has got to be, this is ingenious right here. So this reminds me of a story. There's 3 men sitting at a bar and they're discussing, as a profession, they think that God is an engineer. So the first guy, he says, God must be a mechanical engineer. He says, look at all the joints in the human body. I mean, he's got to be a mechanical engineer. The second one's like, no, God must obviously be an electrical engineer. Just look at the nervous system. And the third guy says, you're both wrong, both of you. He said, God has to be a civil engineer. He says, well, why is that? He says, well, who else would run a waste disposal pipeline through a perfectly good recreational area? And so that's your civil engineer, which is great. Next is the perfectionist. The goal here is, you want to strive for perfection to achieve excellence. And I think from this picture, you see just how perfect all of this really is. Now, if you're someone with OCD, I'm sorry for this picture, but this is perfection to the full. Look at the corners and how they were cut. I mean, this has got to be, one of the greatest things known to man here. And so the goal here, when you're a perfectionist, is you're going to make it work. And of course, with any engineer, you know you have to build in redundancy. Okay. And redundancy is key. As you can see here, if one set of steps fails, you have a backup. And so this is what you want in all of your facilities. You want to have a backup plan in case something fails. So I would say they pretty much hit it out of the park here. The thing with engineers, when you compare engineers versus doctors, the difference between the two is that a doctor, they just kill people one at a time. And so, being that level of engineer is key here, which is great. All right, so when it comes to maintenance, there's 5 tips here in being the best in class when it comes to maintenance. 1 is you have to be electric. 2 is you need to overcome obstacles. You definitely need to be one that's organized. And you've got to be a little different. Maintenance mechanics are a different breed. And they love their job because of the different things that they face from day to day. And then we need to challenge others to be the best, which is the ultimate goal here. We all should strive to be the best. So being electric, as you can see here, this is one of the best ways to be electric, to be shocking. You let your work speak for yourself here. So as you can see what was accomplished here, I'm not quite too sure, but it kind of is what it is. But this reminds me, of a story about, 2 tradespeople. They're trade students at a school, and they're kind of walking, through the school parking lot. And they bumped into each other, and one of them had a brand new bike, and the other, the one asked, man, that's a nice bike. Where'd you get that bike? The other guy tells him, well, this blonde rode up to me, and she threw her bike on the ground, took her clothes off, and said, take whatever you want. You can have anything that you want. And then, the first guy, he's like, man, that was a good call. He took her bike, because I bet those clothes wouldn't have fit either of us. So be electric. Next is to be an overcomer. Being an overcomer means that you overcome obstacles. The goal here is that you set the bar as low as possible. That way you're never disappointed. You can always be positive. You can achieve that bar and just keep lowering it as you go. You don't want to set standards, because that's what normal people do. The goal is to overcome and to be the best at what you do. And right here, this is the ultimate solution provider. When you have a problem, you solve the problem. You overcome that obstacle. And this is engineering and maintenance at its finest in this picture right here. Next is to be organized. As you can tell here, they did a really good job weaving these wires in and out of the cabinet. This has got to be some of the finest work, especially in this environment. You want to show your complexity and your skill and ability to troubleshoot. So you can highlight your skills when you organize a cabinet like this, because you're probably the only one that can solve the problem. And so to highlight yourself and your abilities, the great thing to do here is to organize the cabinet in a way in which only you can solve the problem. That way you can be the superhero. The next is to be different. Find, ways to be different, ways to stand out. This gentleman here created a 3D printing to hold all of his fittings. This is 5S at its finest right here. You want to stand out. You want to be different. When you think about different people, I think about college graduates here. Like when you have a science degree, the question that you ask is, why does it work? When you're an engineering student, the reason you go into that profession is you want to know how does it work. The accountant, as you know, he wants to know how much it would cost. Then the liberal arts major, his big question is would you like fries with that? And so dare to be different. I think that's the key here. And then you have the challenger. You want to challenge people to be their best. And as you know, for the men on this call, this is a great way to do it. The goal is you want to set a benchmark, and you want to try to crush that benchmark and go for a world record. And I think this is a great way to do it, especially when you can go do this and get paid on the clock. I think it'd be great. It's a team building exercise. You could have a large group in there, build camaraderie, which is great. Now let's talk about safety. In safety, the goal here is you want to be virtuous. Self-righteousness is the key to promotion when it comes to leadership. So you definitely want to be virtuous. You also want to be helpful. You got to think ergonomically. You definitely want to think ahead. And you want to think about others. So here, being virtuous, I mean, these stairs had no handicap access before. And so in order to be virtuous, you demand that this stairway have handicap access, and you build it accordingly. I'd like to give this guy props. This is probably one of the greatest things that I've ever seen, which is awesome. You think, following safety rules is kind of like boxing. If you keep your guard up, you're less likely to get hit in the face. And so you want to make sure you're taking care of all these things from a safety perspective. And so you make sure you have the handicap access. One, it's law, and two, it's the right thing to do. Next is to be the helper. there's probably 15 or 20 people in that room inside that are super hot, and there's no AC. So you got to go make sure that the AC works. And this scenario here is kind of a lesser of two evils, right? Do you save the 50 sweaty people? And you sacrifice one man to do it? I think this is kind of where we're at here, right? You think about, the ladder safety here is phenomenal. You got a couple people making sure that, he doesn't slip. It's a good thing because, ladder safety is very important. Things that, you don't want to use here in this situation might be like a human pyramid to try to get up and fix it. You definitely want to use a ladder in this situation. And so it's great. The next is ergonomics. So when it comes to ergonomics, a lot of times we only think about, most things are built for, average sized people. So we think about, how can we make it better for people that are shorter, building stands and things like that. But a lot of times the tall people get neglected. And so this is a great picture of ergonomics. The guy that's 8'4" in the restroom needs to wash his hands. At least he can get to the soap dispenser. This is phenomenal stuff. So think ergonomically. The what ifs are the great things, right? What if you have an 8'4" employee? Are you thinking about him or her? How are you going to handle that? The next is to think ahead. Okay. Like in this picture, they're thinking ahead for winter. They don't want the water to freeze, so you put antifreeze in it. We know that ice causes slips, trips, and falls. You want to save these fish from freezing. And so you put antifreeze in the water, which is great. And this is something that you can run around and brag about. I mean, I kept the water from freezing. We're avoiding slip hazards, and we're saving the fish, which is great. This reminds me, though, of a story. There's this art student. He's kind of sick of working at fast food in the cafe. It's a never-ending job, dead-end job, didn't seem to be going anywhere. So he was able to get a job at a construction site. And being overconfident as an art student, he started bragging about, to all the other workers about all the different things that he could do and how great he was. And one day he decided to brag about, how he could outdo anyone in a feat of strength. And he made a special case of making fun of this kind of wiry, safety manager that was out on the site. But after, several minutes of this guy bragging about how strong and how great he was, the safety manager had enough, and he says, why don't you put your money where your mouth is? He said, I'll bet a week's wages that I can haul something in a wheelbarrow over to that outbuilding that you won't be able to wheel back. And so the braggadocious art student was like, you're on, man. So let's see what you have. And so the engineer or the safety manager reached out. he grabbed a wheelbarrow by the handles and looks at the art student and he's like, "Get in," and left the art student back at the outbuilding and won a week's wages, which is great. The next is to be mindful. Being mindful means doing whatever it takes. Like in this picture, you don't want dark parking lots at night. Could be dangerous for people. So you do whatever it takes to get that light bulb changed. Being mindful in an emergency, say there's an evacuation, maybe there's a fire in a building, being mindful is yelling and screaming, "Run, move! My life's more important than yours," and pushing people out of the way so you can get out. You got to be mindful. This reminds me of a guy we called Trip. Trip was a mindful guy, but he's the guy that falls down the stairs all the time, can't walk up the stairs. So you got the nickname Trip. You know, that's a guy you want to be around. There's always a hazard waiting to happen. He's a great guy. So with that, there's 5 tips in each area on how to be the best leader. If you have any questions, we'll take those now.
Thank you so much for such an educational and informative webinar, Captain Unreliability. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
We have a few questions. The first one we have is, what do you think about pilot programs and do you support them?
Pilot. Well, pilots, it reminds me of this balloonist. This man was flying in a hot air balloon and he realized that he was lost. And he couldn't figure out where he was, so he reduces his height down a bit and he spots a lady below and he kind of yells out at her, "Excuse me, ma'am, can you tell me where I am? I seem to be lost." And she said, "Well, you're about 50 foot in the air, hovering in a hot air balloon." The guy in the balloon was like, "Yeah, you must be an engineer." She says, "I am." He said, "How'd you know?" He said, "Well, everything you've told me is technically correct, but it's of no use to anyone." And she kind of chuckled and said, "You must be a manager." He says, "Well, what do you mean by that?" He says, I am, but how did you know?" She said, "Well, you don't know where you are, you don't know where you're going, but you expect me to be able to help. You're in the same position you were before we met, and somehow that's my fault." And so when I think about pilots, I think about that story that when you run a pilot, it's just going to be, management blaming everyone else for its failure. 70% of initiatives fail. And so someone will step up and try to do it. And, they'll just end up getting the blame for it. So that's kind of what I think about pilots.
Okay, thank you very much. I have another question. So when you're working with people, how do you show reliability leadership in the most positive way?
I think about myself and make sure that, I take the blame from other people to show everyone just how great I am. and I take the credit for all the work they've done. You want to make sure that you're promotable, and so the best way to do that is to kind of do those things, kind of yell and scream at everybody, making sure everything gets done and they're hitting deadlines. I just sit in the office and wait for the results so that I can share them with the team about how great I did. I think that's probably one of the keys to being a great reliability leader.
Wonderful. Thank you. So we do have a question, Captain Unreliability. Does having a meeting about a meeting to schedule meetings about the original meeting count as continuous improvement loop?
Yeah, it does. And then you need a feedback about the meeting. So in order to get the feedback, you have to have another meeting. The greatest way to solve problems in your facility. And so that, or one of the greater things to do is look at your calendar, and any gap you have in your calendar, schedule a meeting, because it gets really boring when you don't have anything to do. So, you schedule a meeting to create a meeting for a meeting. So yeah, I would say that's definitely continuous improvement.
Awesome. So meetings critical.
Always. Meetings, and then donuts in the meeting. And then be the guy that asks the question at the end of the meeting that extends the meeting for another 30, 45 minutes, so that you can eat a few more donuts.
Excellent. So I may ask you to switch your hat here to Reliable Joe.
Oh.
And so if you are entering a facility that is starting from the beginning
Mm-hmm.
to try to improve reliability, what is your number one tip for beginning that process, or dipping your toe in the water to get started?
On improving a facility,
Yes, reliability in a facility.
I would start with getting to know all my operators and work with them on improving. What you'll find, especially from a maintenance position, is that no matter how great your maintenance department is, you're never going to be world class without a world class operations program. And so I spend a lot of time with operations, developing operators, and developing that relationship between operations and maintenance, working with my maintenance guys and having them help teach operators on some of the fundamentals of maintenance, as well as troubleshooting simple problems, as well as operator PMs. Cleaning, tightening, and lubrication eliminate 70% of the issues on average in a facility. And so if we can get good at those three things, it's fairly simple to gain a more reliable plant. And so I spend a lot of time in operations. I have as a maintenance manager, and even now as a consultant, when they bring me in for maintenance, I'm still working, solving issues from an operations perspective. So I think that's the key as to where to start. It's building that relationship and rapport and credibility with the operations folks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Joe and Captain Unreliability, for joining us today and presenting this very entertaining and informative webinar. We appreciate you joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And I want to encourage everyone to check out the Captain Unreliability blog on plantservices.com. Visit ReliabilityX to learn more about what Joe and ReliabilityX does in facilities, and visit the YouTube channel and the podcast as well. We thank you for joining us and invite you to register on sepco.com for the July 20th webinar on 5 ways to conserve water in process plants. And again, that's July 20th. That'll be our next webinar. And that wraps up for now. If you guys have any further questions, you can email Joe directly at the email address on the screen, or reach out to Lori D at sepco.com to send us any questions. And thank you again for joining us. And Joe, have a great day. And we look forward to seeing y'all at the webinar in July.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, guys. Bye-bye.